Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Byrne, for yielding me the customary 30 minutes. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Thornberry, and the honorable ranking member from Washington, Mr. Smith, for their service and for concluding work on the conference report, which authorizes resources for our uniformed men and women, civilian defense workforce, our veterans and their families. The defense bill is one of the most complex bills that come each year before Congress for consideration and action, and I know the hours and the weeks and the months worth of work that goes into these negotiations by staff and members. It is also in general a bill that receives broad bipartisan support, which is a reflection of the leadership, character, and abilities of the chairman and ranking member and their staff. Mr. Speaker, there is a great deal to support in this conference report and some provisions that continue to raise concern. Some items that were of grave concern have been dropped from the final conference report, like the fiscal cliff, language that would have authorized discrimination by federal contractors, and some anti-environment riders. I am very upset, however, that for the second year in a row, the House caved to unreasonable Senate demands to drop the House-passed provision to honor our atomic veterans with a simple service medal. These uniformed men and women literally gave their lives in service to our country, and in many cases, totally unprotected, they were exposed to extreme levels of radiation during the post-World War II era and subsequent Cold War period. Because they signed secrecy oaths, they could not even inform their doctors that their many illnesses might be related to radiation exposure. They never complained, and they did their duty. Their heroism and their service have been publicly recognized by Presidents George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. All we are seeking is that they receive a simple service medal. More than 3 out of every 4 of these veterans have already passed away, unrecognized for their service. Yet the Senate and Senate Armed Services Chairman John McCain and a handful of Pentagon bureaucrats in particular seems to think it's a major scandal to provide them with a service medal. My meetings with some in the Pentagon have been particularly troubling because of what I perceived as their total lack of sensitivity and their total lack of appreciation for the service that these veterans provided to our country. These men and women deserve better from their government, and I hope next year, when the House once again includes this bipartisan measure in the defense bill, that it won't be so weak-kneed as to cave for a third time before such unreasonable intransigence. This conference report, like its most recent predecessors, continues to authorize billions of dollars for our wars against the Islamic State in Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere, without any debate on an authorization for the use of military force in those countries and elsewhere. I hope that one of Speaker Ryan's priorities during the first week of January will be to meet with President-elect Trump and work out a timeline for when Mr. Trump will send an AUMF to the Congress on these wars and when the House will finally fulfill its constitutional duty to debate and vote on this matter. For over 2.5 years, this House has failed time and time again to take up this serious debate, even after President Obama sent an AUMF to Capitol Hill for action. Enough is enough. With a Republican in the White House, I hope the Republican-controlled Congress will finally do its duty. The cowardice of the 113th and 114th Congresses must not be allowed to extend into and infect the 115th Congress. Mr. Speaker, I also want to say one more thing about the NDAA conference report. This conference report includes a very important title that incorporates the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act. As many of my colleagues know, this is a bipartisan measure championed and introduced in the House by my friend and Republican colleague, Congressman Chris Smith, and myself, and Ben Cardin in the United States Senate. The Global Magnitsky Act builds on the seminal Sergei Magnitsky Rule of Law Accountability Act, legislation that I authored, which focused on Russia, that was approved by the Congress and signed into law in 2012. The law targets individual Russian officials accountable for the death of Russian lawyer Sergei Magnitsky, as well as other Russian officials engaged in corruption, human rights abuses, or who seek to undermine the rule of law. It denies them visas to the United States and freezes their assets in the United States. The Global Magnitsky Act will extend the use of those same targeted sanctions to all countries, not just Russia. It will ensure that visiting the United States and having access to our financial system, including U.S. dollars, are privileges that should not be granted to those officials who violate basic human rights and the rule of law. Mr. Speaker, as we enter uncharted territory of a Trump administration, it is critical that Congress maintain its bipartisan leadership and support for human rights. It is critical that Congress continue to hold accountable the Russian government and government officials around the world who engage in corruption, human rights abuses, and who flaunt the rule of law. During the long campaign, two words I never heard Mr. Trump utter were human rights. And quite frankly, I was disturbed by his public admiration of Russian strongman Vladimir Putin, whose government has jailed and even killed human rights defenders and political opponents. Mr. Speaker, in the past years, I have often voted against final passage of the NDAA conference report. In general, I can't vote for a bill that provides tens of billions of dollars for wars that Congress refuses to debate and authorize. I can't vote for a bill that ties the hands of the president, any president, to shut down the prison at the U.S. Naval Base at Guantanamo Bay. And I can't support a bloated budget that fails to make hard choices, provide the Pentagon with even more money than it asked for, and continues to increase in size without end for this foreseeable future. However, because of the inclusion of the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act, this year I will vote for support of the FY 2017 NDAA conference report. The Global Magnitsky Act will give Congress a tool to hold to account human rights abusers, even if our new president ends up turning a blind eye. This language in this authorization bill is important because it sends a signal, no matter what our next president believes on the issue of human rights, that in this Congress, in a bipartisan way, we believe that if the United States of America stands for anything, it needs to stand out loud and foursquare for human rights. So I urge all my colleagues to support the conference report, notwithstanding many reservations that we may have, and I reserve the balance of my time.